Do you have a character or weapon in the game that you really want but you don't have enough Stellar Jades? Here is a smarter way to recharge your favorite games like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail. Look no further than Loot Bar. Loot Bar is the most reliable top-up platform, saving 20% for all orders compared with the official channel, and an extra 5% off for your first purchase. It's 100% safe as you will only be using your UID. We will buy a pack for 3,000 Stellar Jades for $42, which otherwise would have cost $50. Totally saving $7.5. We received the crystals we purchased in less than 3 minutes. All recharge will be done through the official channel with miHoYo, which allows you to enjoy all top-up offers. Ready to level up your gaming experience? Check the link in the description to get the amazing discount.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. At last, as you can see from the thumbnail, we can finally see the full kit of Sunday and his light cone. As we all know, Sunday is one of the most anticipated characters at the moment. His lore is quite interesting to follow and his character design is stunning. Some rumors also say that he will become one of the meta supports in the future. Are these rumors true? So without further ado, let's jump into it. As usual, the basic attack of Sunday will deal imaginary damage equivalent to 130% of the attack owned by Sunday to a single enemy target. Of course, there's nothing special about it, so let's skip it. Next up is the Sunday skill, called Benison of Paper and Rights. Similar to some info that was released earlier, in this skill, Sunday will target one ally and summon to get 100% action advance and then will get an additional 20% damage generated. If the target of this skill is a character who has a summon, then the additional damage will increase by another 20%. One thing to keep in mind though is that if you use this skill on other characters who have Path Harmony, the action advance won't work. It's a shame, of course. Anyway, I can see what you're thinking. Yep, even though we only have a quick look, we can see that this skill is an upgraded version of Bronia's that we can get in the past. It's debatable whether this skill gives Bronia an advantage over Sunday, as it covers everything not in Bronia's skills. The question is it good? Absolutely, especially if we look at the description. The additional damage given to the buff recipient will be much greater for characters who have summon. It seems that Sunday will be very important character for the summon meta in the future, right? Next, we will move on to the ultimate for Sunday. For this, he will provide energy equivalent to 20% of the maximum energy possessed by the target ally. Then he will give his ally a special status for 3 turns called the Beatified. And the character who gets this status will also get an additional 10% critical damage over and above what they already have, plus 6.4%. Just a heads up, this ultimate only applies to the most recent target given by Sunday, so we can give this ultimate buff to 2 different targets. On the other hand, if Sunday loses the battle, the buff will disappear. So overall, Sunday's ultimate is pretty solid. At first glance, it seems like a mix of Tingyun's and Sparkle's kits. Sunday's ultimate can provide energy to the target and bonus critical damage, similar to Sparkle's kit. As for his talent, when Sunday uses this skill, the target's critical rate will increase by 10% to 25% for 2 turns. This kit might be of interest to many people because the critical rate increase buff is quite rare in this game. Some of the buffs we can remember are the ones from Lightcon Sparkle and Fusion. This critical rate increase buff is important because with Sunday we no longer need to look for critical rate substances, which can be confusing, of course. We can focus on other substances like attack, for example. Next, the technique is called the Glorious Mysteries. When you use this technique, it will increase all damage generated by the ally by 50% for 2 turns when you start the next battle. This is pretty solid technique, though not the best. At least for 2 turns, we will get additional damage from all allies. But if we use Sunday with a hyper carry team, this technique is a little less useful because we only use one main DPS in the team, while this buff will provide additional damage to all team members. Alright guys, next on the agenda is the traces owned by Sunday. But as usual, before we get into the traces, we will try to discuss the status of the traces first. In terms of Sunday's traces, we've got 3 statuses: critical damage, effect resistance, and defense. It seems that effect resistance and defense are pretty common for units with Harmony Path. They need to be able to survive enemy attacks and provide consistent support as much as possible. Interestingly, there's a critical damage status here that seems a bit unusual. If you've been following along with what I've said from the start, you should know that this critical damage will be useful for determining how much of a buff comes from Sunday's ultimate. Since Sunday's ultimate buff is scaled from critical damage, it goes without saying that critical damage is a very important status. Now let's look at the 3 traces that Sunday has. I think the first trace, Rest Days Longing, has a very beneficial effect. With this trace, Sunday doesn't have to spend skill points on skills. You can trigger this effect after 2 turns. Even though there's a cooldown, this trace can get rid of the SP Sunday uses, which makes Sunday somewhat SP neutral. Meanwhile, the second trace, called Exalted Sweep, gives Sunday 25% energy right away when the battle starts. I think this trace is pretty good because it gives Sunday a good starting point to use his ultimate. The last trace, called Heaven in Palm, also has a great effect. It lets him remove debuff from the target when he uses his skill. It pretty much can give something that Abundance should have. Alright, let's move on to his Eidolons. For Eidolon 1, Millennium Squadus, when Sunday uses this skill, the target's all-type resistant penetration will increase by 20% for 1 turn. For those of you who aren't familiar with all-type resistant penetration buff, it's similar to the one given by Ranmei through her ultimate. It can reduce the enemy's resistance against all types, increasing your damage output. It's a great buff, of course, maybe one of the best you can get in this game. Next, for the second Eidolon named Faith Outstrips Failure, when the buff named the Beatified is in battle, it will increase the speed of Sunday by 20. This applies to both the buff giver and the buff receiver. In this second Eidolon, both the buff giver and the buff receiver will get a flat speed of 20 points as long as the buff is active, which is 3 turns. Overall, I think this Eidolon is pretty good. It's not as overpowered as some characters, but Eidolon 2 is definitely one of the stronger ones. I'm not sure the speed increase for the buff recipient is a big deal though, because Sunday will usually give the main DPS a turn. Next, we will move on to the fourth Eidolon, named Sculpture's Preamble. This Eidolon will give 8 energy when we start the turn. I know, it's a pretty decent Eidolon if we build Sunday with speed fast enough. If we don't have enough speed though, I don't think we can make good use of this Eidolon effect. Still, it's pretty decent. At last, we come to Eidolon 6, which is typically the best Eidolon the character has. This Eidolon 6 has a critical rate effect that can be stacked up to 3 times, which means it will increase the critical rate by up to 75% at its maximum level. I think you will agree that's pretty cool, right? If our critical rate is over 100%, every 1% above that will be converted into 2% critical damage for the person who gets the buff from the skill. At first glance, it's clear that these Eidolons are pretty impressive. Imagine 75% additional critical rate, guys. Even if you have Sunday E6, your DPS character doesn't even need to have a critical rate at all to be effective, which means you can focus on other things like critical damage. This is a pretty powerful ability, right? Alright, now let's move on to Sunday's Light Cone, which is called a Grounded Ascent. This Light Cone has the effect that when a user uses a skill or ultimate on one of the ally characters, the target will receive 1 stack of Hymn for 2 turns, which can stack 3 times. Each stack increases the damage produced by 15%. Once you've used 2 skill points, you will get 1 back. On the surface, this Light Cone seems similar to Bronya's. Just a reminder, Bronya's Light Cone increases the user's energy regeneration by 10%. It also provides an additional 1 skill point after using the ultimate 2 times. When the user uses the skill, the next character who gets the turn will produce 30% additional damage. Yes, if we compare both Light Cone head to head, it seems that Sunday's Light Cone is an upgraded version of Bronya's. I think this is a good thing because if you already have Bronya's Light Cone, you don't need to take Sunday's Light Cone again. Okay guys, I think that's all for today. How about it? Do you think you wanna pull Sunday in version 2.7? Please leave your comments down below. Also, don't forget to check out my another video because it's just as cool. Thanks for watching, stay safe, stay healthy, and see you in the next video.